welcome back to WTF Is Up. You've got me, Jeremy, and my amazing compadre Omar hosting today's session, as always. And we are so thrilled because this marks the end of our 2025 season. And of course, in true podcast fashion, what do we have coming up today, Omar?
Today, we're going to do the obligatory, what were the big stories of 25 and what should we be looking forward to for 26?
I know it's totally shocking. Podcast doing a year in review and predictions episode. But now that we are one of Spotify's top 10% new podcasts of 2025, we have no choice but to fall in line. Isn't that right, Omar?
A Spotify instant hit show is what they called us, and in the top 20% of all videos watched on Spotify too. So thank you to the not handful, but perhaps dozens, maybe even on some episodes, hundreds of people who've tuned in for this. And it really means a lot to us. So
Thank you for coming on this journey with us. And just like every great WTF is up journey, we've got to kick this one off with a dad joke. Omar, lay it down.
well, our goal for the year with this podcast was to cover big topics, but also get a little spicy sometimes. And I hope we did that without getting too jalapeno business.
I actually appreciate that. Maybe it's like as a Buffalo guy, I love the little spice humor, but that hits, as the kids say. Okay, speaking of hitting, take us back to 2025, Omar. What a year it's been. Where do you want to start?
So many big stories. And just a little plug to go back and listen to our first 10, 11 episodes, because some of our year in review here are going to be topics that we gave entire episodes to because they were timely and important. So no surprise, some of these are going to pop up again in our year in review. The number one story is the economy, including tech as a sector. So the stock market is being entirely propped up by AI companies, in particular, NVIDIA. If you remove NVIDIA, the entire market is pretty close to flat. Tons of economic uncertainty. Tariffs have not helped, slashing foreign aid, inflation. And then, of course, the thing that we care a lot about and wrote a book about, Jeremy, which is the job market. Jobless growth was something we talked about in multiple episodes, layoffs starting to happen. The most recent jobs report just came out that showed employers added, maybe 60, 70,000 jobs. Who knows if we're getting the right data anymore, by the way. But that wasn't as much as we needed. And the unemployment rate continues to sort of tick up. It's now the highest level it's been since probably COVID era. And more concerning in that month-to-month chart, it's just continued to tick up every month for the last, couple years now. Just today, there was a Washington Post article that economists tend to look at lagging indicators, but they said, hey, a job recession has already hit tech.
Wow,
And
the
that's
R
probably
word.
long been the case. But I think that's probably the number one story is just all the weird stuff happening in the economy, inclusive of the job market.
Now,
What
let
do
me
you think,
ask you a big
Jeremy?
question. Yeah, let me ask you a big question about this because I think objectively things are not pointing in the right direction. So obviously the trends are negative in all these different areas. However, there's this big sort of talking point of the last couple of years, in fact, of is this a recession or a vibe session? In other words, is this truly like bad economic situation that sort of parallels some of the worst economic situations in our history? Or is it the perception of the situation has just gotten so negative, so rotten, that we just can't see the silver lining out there? When you think about those two different ways of understanding our moment, Omar, which one do you lean towards?
Is that sort of an argument for like, are the foundations still there for a strong economy, for a strong job market versus the perception, kind of that classic like consumer price index, how confident are consumers feeling, isn't necessarily the same metric as consumer actual spending, right? Is that what you're
Exactly.
saying? Sort of
Yeah.
the,
How do we square those things? What's going on here?
I mean, look, I think it's probably a little bit of both, but it's inarguable that the numbers don't look great. They're not dismal. We're still pretty low with overall unemployment. There are still job postings, but it doesn't feel that way. And we talked in previous episodes about specific parts of the job market, career starters, knowledge workers. How do you get that first entry level job when 5 years of experience are now required for an entry level job? Right? It's definitionally oxymoronic. So I think it doesn't feel like it's a strong job market, and the numbers are now catching up to that. But what do you think?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
work
No,
with
I
job
think
seekers all the time.
the biggest sign was just that both the Biden and Trump administrations have now been in this awkward position of trying to tell Americans, or the economy is actually better than you think it is. Trump was just on national TV last night saying, hey, the price of a turkey is down, ignore everything else. And so I just feel like whether it's completely rooted in objective facts or just a subjective feeling, either way, it is people's experience, and we've got to grapple with that as a society. So,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
You don't need to buy $37. Just buy the $2.
that's right. I tried telling that to my daughters; they were not as impressed.
Exactly. So I think the other piece there is just the raw numbers of job applications, right? Like hundreds, sometimes thousands of people you're competing with for a new job, right? And a lot of those are bots talking to bots, but it is just harder to get in the door, harder to get noticed, harder to actually get the job for the most coveted types of jobs.
Absolutely. So that's the economy. Where do you want to go next, Omar? What else strikes
Okay,
you from our crazy year?
the other big one, obviously, is related to this, which is AI, which has probably been a through line for most of our episodes. And I think this is probably the year that we move from fully from like, hey, can you write an email for me or a performance review to oh wow, to holy shit. And that isn't to say that it's all been amazing. And of course, there's been a ton of AI slop. I think Merriam-Webster's word of the year was slop, right?
Wow.
And
Now,
then
did a
you,
human editor come up with that, or was that
right,
Merriam-Webster GPT?
right. And then you have this new best-selling book that's all about this idea of inshitification,
Yes.
right? Now everything that's internet based has just gotten worse. But Time Magazine, kids out there, this used to be a reputable news source that everyone would pay attention to and read. It named the architects of AI as its person of the year. Never mind the grammatical
Really?
error.
Wow. Interesting.
They need to rebrand from person to people of the year. But this was clearly the year of AI, getting into mass work processes, mass culture. And as we also talked about in previous episodes, in some ways, a bigger topic than the pursuit of singularity, that artificial general intelligence, is this idea of circularity. It's always been the case that tech companies have done deals with one another, right? And helped each other out in that way. But this is like a whole different level. It's an intertwining of business models, of customers, of partnerships that's meant to have the effect, or at least the perception, that this industry is real, it's too big to fail, just a smart long-term investment area, even if the business model is very much TBD. So, I think this is AI moved into the mainstream this year. And I think, we could talk about, we definitely want to come back to this in our prediction segment. But the reality is that like it's still just pattern recognition. I was chatting with somebody from NVIDIA recently who was saying like, hey, we've trained these models on most of the data that exists in the world, right? So the question is, what's next for this type of technology? Things like humanoid robots, energy usage and servers and other ways that this extend into even the physical world. But I think you see really amazing progress in these models performing on highly analytical tasks in like this narrow band of tasks. There's no doubt that AI is now way better than it used to be and better than most humans.
Let me
And
offer a hot take there, Omar, because I want to push back a little bit. I think that even though there may have been AI executives who were clinking their champagne glasses at all the holiday parties across Soma this year, saying, oh, our valuations are up so much more, blah, blah, blah. The reality is, in my mind, it was a terrible year for AI. Let me explain why. I think the fundamental sin of AI is that they got us addicted in the first 2 years since ChatGPT came out, this idea of massive progress year after year. And I think this year, if you think about the fundamental ability of AI to take on more important stuff in our society, it absolutely plateaued. If you think about a prompt that you did in December of 2025 and a prompt that you did in December of 2024, ChatGPT 4.0 to ChatGPT 5.2, zero difference for the average user. We're nowhere closer to AGI. We're nowhere closer to any of this stuff where you're like, okay, I'm just going to hire a bunch of AI agents to get my jobs done. On the other hand, the stuff that they did throw at us was all a parlor trick. If you think about Sora and all these videos of, MLK changing his I have a dream speech, or Nano Banana from Google and all these crazy things you could generate, they're cool, they're eye-catching, but they don't fundamentally move the needle on anything useful for society. And as a result, I think the darkest sort of sign for AI coming out of 2025 is if you look at the polling, whereas people used to be neutral to a little bit positive about AI coming into this year, thinking, hey, maybe this is a great new tool like the internet. now people are deeply negative. They're starting to see it maybe eat away at jobs or slow the job market. It's not adding new real value to their lives. And so I think unless the AI industry turns it around in 2026 and gets back to progress, back to utility, it could be huge reckoning coming in the new year. And I'll save that for the prediction. But that is my take on where things stand at the end of this year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't disagree. I think the question is, what are those aforementioned band of tasks that it is actually better at and will drive really exciting efficiencies? It's both tasks and sectors where it's just unleashing new potential. And the thing that really blew me away was, I don't know if you saw this thing that recently came out about OpenAI's ability to do head-to-head competition with human
Yes,
experts,
yes.
right? On tasks that require 4 to 8 hours for a human to do. 5.2 GPT 5.2 is winning on those tasks 71% of the time, as judged by other humans.
Yes.
Previously, the best was under 50%. So we're now at a point where for specific tasks, as judged by other humans, it's just better. So how can this not be transformational to the way we do work? Now, I don't disagree with you that we haven't seen the massive societal impacts, and it is questionable what it's really going to do to work. And I think we will get to that in the predictions of like, are we going to swing back to just like valuing humans again? But the reality is these models are getting way better, and the potential is there to truly transform everything.
I just have to give people a little bit of a holiday listening list here. Obviously, go back and listen to those old episodes of WTF Is Up. But if you really want to see sort of where AI is failing in its ability to provide utility, the one podcast you have to listen to over the holidays is a podcast called Shell Game. Are you familiar with this, Omar?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this is a guy who used to run a hot magazine called Atavist, and he basically tried to create an entire company of AI avatars, AI CTOs and COs and all this. And I think the fundamental thing, and this comes back to maybe why we have a fighting chance as a human species, is that AI is so good at those tasks, as you mentioned. Like it can outcompete, a CPA at financial analysis. But when left to its own devices, it just sits there and spins its wheels. It's like that intern is completely disorganized, even if they're brilliant. And I think until we can get to that point of AI actually being proactive, getting stuff done, being that sort of digital butler that we all crave in our lives, we're not going to ultimately get to the progress. And instead, we're going to be thinking about, man, that data center is driving up electricity rates. Oh, it's using a lot of water. All these things that are leading to negative downward perceptions of AI as opposed to the other way. But that
I'm
being
not
said, yeah, what's your take? And then what else do you want to call out from 2025?
Well, I mean, personally, I'm not betting against this technologies. Like, I think there's always been over the last 3 years, any moment in time, any opinion you've had on fill in the blank, this model is not great at fill in the blank. It's gotten better, right? And I think there are big questions about how we relate to it, as you're saying. There's big questions about the business model. There's big questions about the industry. Unabashedly, inarguably, this is a bubble, right? Now, in our prediction segment, we'll get into like, will the bubble burst? What happens if it bursts? But I think there's big questions about the industry. The fundamental underlying technology, I'm never going to bet against progressing in ways that are potentially transformative. I think the other thing we saw with AI was just the extension into new fields and applications. In particular, I think about the arts and entertainment and creativity. What does it mean for human creativity? Perhaps the most alarming use cases, you had this band Velvet Sundown, right? That got millions of streams on Spotify, released 2 albums in short order, and came out later and said, actually, we're just AI. And I think they're still on Spotify, but with a little disclaimer, like, this is not human generated. This question of AI in the arts has been central to probably one of the biggest business stories of the year around the Netflix, Paramount, Warner Brothers, drama. So, I think that's been another interesting and possibly concerning area of AI spreading its wings.
Yeah, I think one area that our fellow marketers should be worried about is you now see this Coca-Cola ad everywhere. And everyone knows Coca-Cola usually comes out with their holiday ad with the polar bears and all that. What you may not have thought of is like, whoa, that was probably thousands of people making an income off of this ad to animate the polar bears and design it and make the music and everything. Now there's this little caption on the lower left-hand side. Look for it next time where it says generated with Real Magic AI, aka Coca-Cola's in-house AI tool. And I was like, dang, if even the biggest, fanciest brands are now relying upon AI for creativity and execution, what does that mean for the human artists who are actually creating all of that originally? So something to think
Big
about.
questions, big questions. So other huge stories for the year, just because we want to play that curation role a little bit for you. We talked about in previous episodes the rise of entrepreneurship, which is really exciting, partially because you can leverage these tools to build faster. The build cycles are a lot faster. And also because of the economic uncertainty. So many people are saying, hey, let me take the reins of my own life and career a little bit here. It was really interesting to research for that episode and learn that the majority of Gen Z, even those who have full-time jobs, are actually side hustling, side stacking, and three-fourths of them say they want to be entrepreneurs. And so I'm seeing that in higher ed all the time, just a growth in people saying, hey, actually the barriers are lower to getting into entrepreneurship, and it's an logical career choice for me. Even though it's hard, it is one of the ways that you can still exercise agency and autonomy in building your career. So that's been exciting. Anything you want to say about that, Jeremy?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. Do you think that if the economy gets better, people will then give these things up and say, okay, I'm going to go back to the W-2 and the stability of health insurance and all that? Or do you think it's truly like a permanent generational shift where once people have tasted this experience, they'll want that freedom again in the future, no matter what?
I work with so many entrepreneurs, mostly on the younger end of the spectrum. And, when you're younger, you have a little bit more of that grind ability. You have lower opportunity costs from doing other things. But they all almost universally say, holy shit, this is hard. And I could not imagine doing anything else. Right.
Whoa.
So I think a lot about like getting that bug, that entrepreneurial bug, and how hard it can be to return to that classic 9 to 5. And then there's a larger question of like, are the classic 9 to 5s even going to continue to exist in the same way? Like, do people have that same optionality indefinitely? Can you build a career that way versus like, does it just make sense to sort of side hustle, create a passive income source, or maybe this is a thing they could eventually graduate into. Let's de-risk it by doing it on the side. And that was kind of our path to entrepreneurship originally, Jeremy. But I think it's a larger shift that's enduring. I don't think it's certainly the economic uncertainty drives necessity entrepreneurship a bit. I don't know exactly what percentage, but I think it's one of those things that when you've had that seminal experience, especially earlier in your career, it's great to also couple that with the learnings, the mentorship, the exposure, the brand value of working at a larger, company or organization. But it's like it's in there, and
Yeah.
it's hard to pretend that you can just be a corporate slave.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about another mega trend on the other side of the entrepreneurship spectrum, the giant tech company side, that was really sort of a through line throughout 2025, even though it didn't always get attention thanks to our dear leader and our crazy AI obsession, which is that all of these tech companies got off scot free in their antitrust trials. Google
Mm.
basically got off with a little smack on his hand. Basically, the judge decided not to pursue Meta for buying up Instagram and WhatsApp. And so I wonder, as someone who's so deep in this entrepreneurship world, on the one hand, it feels like letting giants get bigger and bigger is not necessarily great for the little guy, the future entrepreneur who wants to challenge them. On the other hand, allowing these companies to buy up the little guys, the WhatsApps and the Instagrams, creates an exit opportunity for entrepreneurs. What was your take on how that all unfolded?
I mean, I think in general, this is also true with the Netflix, Warner Brothers, Paramount stuff we were just
Yes.
talking about. Google, by the way, is still doing the majority of everything related to AI and web search. They're doing 3 to 5 times as much as the other models because of their prowess in search and the way they've combined their perfected and arguably monopolistic web search product with AI, right? You can't disentangle these. So the big players are just getting bigger, and I think that's bad, right? I mean, it's bad. It's bad for everyone. Like lack of competition is bad for everyone except for these companies who can drive efficiencies, capture more market share, et cetera. It's bad for users. It's bad for employees, and I don't like it.
Yeah,
I
I'll say
don't
the only
like it.
people who seem to really like it, besides the tech companies themselves, are the VCs
Yeah,
who
the
now have the
investors.
ear of our president.
Yes, the investors. But, there's still exit opportunities. I always think that if your motivation for entrepreneurship is that, it's probably misguided. So I don't put too much stock in that either way. Last few big things we just want to mention outside of like business, tech, AI is just cultural and political stuff, just to say, like, we've had a full year of Trump part two. We talked a little bit about in previous episodes of what's happening with men, and part of what has fueled Trump even taking office again was men's move rightward. And there's been a lot of years in reviews that I've been reading about how the culture has shifted right. And, Taylor Swift's album and embracing that old school Americana and traditional roles in some ways. So I feel like we can't do a year in review without just mentioning culturally and politically what we've all been experiencing. But anything at a high level you want to say about you know any of that, Jeremy?
Yeah, well, you'll appreciate this as a big time soccer fan. And for those who don't know, Omar actually used to be a reporter for MLS, so he's deep in this world. I think the Trump administration, regardless of how you feel about culture and politics and all that, had the year's biggest own goal in the sense that he was elected on this massive wave of the vibe session we were talking about. People were really upset about the Biden year's inflation and all that. And then he came in and he clearly made things worse. Tariffs and all of that was not a good way to deal with it. And so I wonder if in 2026, the president will kind of learn his lesson and say, okay, I got to hunker down and serve the people because this is why they elected me. Or if we're going to come back to this moment of just indecision and anxiety about the future, which I think grinds the gears of economic progress to a halt. So my wish for our country in 2026, regardless of ideology, is we can get back to solving the people's problems, not just sort of settling petty grudges.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to envision our dear leader staying on message. So I don't know if I have faith in that, but it does seem like in many ways, some of this uncertainty has been self-created. And it's frustrating because there's so many things happening that are that are scary. Like, we should feel nervous about. We've talked a lot about AI. We've talked about the job market. We haven't even mentioned the other existential dreads that, at least for me, are always operating in the background of life, which is climate change, which continues its inexorable march, right? The constant threat of like gun violence, political divisiveness. We could at least have leadership that doesn't want to make it worse and take the high road sometimes in some of the cultural battles, and remember the importance of civility and decency. So that would be my political commentary for the year.
So I'll just throw out one other idea. I remember being really fascinated when we were kids, Omar. I think a reporter had asked George H.W. Bush, who obviously was a very wealthy man when he was running for president, what the price of a gallon of milk was. And he said, I don't know, maybe $10. Clearly, it wasn't $10 in 1988, certainly not even $10 today, even with inflation. And I wonder if, to the extent that someone like Trump or even Biden, who also was not that excited about dealing with these issues, kept saying, oh, it's not real, it's not real. Like, maybe our political class has become so detached from reality because they're not engaging with reality. They no longer have the empathy that we always talk about, that powerful E word, to really do that Vulcan mind meld with society. So maybe a little wish for us to get back out there in the world, have that connection again.
Yeah, we definitely seem to be in a moment of an aristocratic ruling class across all sectors. So we'll see. It wasn't that long ago that Obama was complaining about not being able to find arugula in Iowa or whatever, right?
Yes,
But at least the silver lining there was like, hey, maybe he's actually going to the grocery store and can't find arugula, right?
that's right.
and and so yeah, we'll see.
Even if
I
you're
think that,
shopping at Whole Foods, at least you're shopping.
yeah, it was Whole Foods for sure. But that common touch seems like something we need to return to in our politics. So this is a perfect moment to transition into our predictions for 2026. First one, Jeremy, AI. We've
Yeah.
established it's a bubble. Is the bubble going to burst? What's going to happen if it does?
So I'm going to give you two conflicting predictions related to AI because I want to play the field and cover my bases.
Nice, nice.
So the first one goes back to this idea of the GPT vals. So basically, this is OpenAI's evaluation of their performance on specific tasks. And because I think you're right, AI is now really effective at very specific, circumscribed, sort of repetitive tasks, where you're going to see the biggest disruption in 2026 is not at the role level, because most roles are bundles of tasks that include that proactivity, that human piece that AI is not able to really replicate today. But then, if we think about the one thing that AI can do really well, which is doing basic software development, basic coding, You think about the one role that doesn't always involve that much human relationship, having a junior software developer role. I think that in 2026, you're going to start to see some bankruptcies of the big coding bootcamp companies. So these are the companies that got rich in the 20s. Because, of course, that was a decade of learn to code. All you needed wasn't a college degree or a master's degree, but basic proficiency in Python, and you were golden. And I think if those jobs are the ones that are being hit hardest, and that's certainly what the Stanford research is suggesting. And we discussed this a couple episodes ago, how junior developer payroll data is plummeting all of a sudden. That those are the people who are going to feel it most directly, and they're going to actually have this existential moment. So that's my first prediction.
To broaden out from roles to industries, I think it's going to hold up in certain spaces and actually just have even more exciting potential in verticals like education and learning, right? Unless you can magically figure out quickly how to make every teacher a master teacher at their craft and, make kids stop taking shortcuts and caring about grades. So I continue to be bullish but concerned about applications in education. And then, of course, healthcare and biotech, drug discovery, diagnosis, all of that is, just aiding the humans in that seems like a really exciting space. And then, as you mentioned, software development is not going to hold up very well. I don't want to paint everything with the same brush, but I totally agree that there's going to be a disproportionate impact in industries and roles.
That is sort of
What's prediction number 2 about AI?
Yeah, that's where AI is going to make a really direct impact on a specific sort of micro industry. I think the macro prediction, I know this is going to be a hard one to hear, although probably not unexpected based on what I said earlier, is that 2026 is the year that the AI engine, the little engine that could, finally runs out of steam because of all the things you mentioned. Running out of training data, running out of new techniques, running out of, most importantly, the ability to convert these concepts and this technology into hard-earned cash. For example, right now, OpenAI, as we speak, is in negotiations to value themselves at $870 billion. And yet, they are making like $10 billion a year in revenue. And unless they can figure out a way to suddenly create AI that is massively more productive or that can replace actual human labor, the result is that OpenAI is going to go down and it's going to take down the entire economy around them. And I want to be really clear. I don't think it's just the AI economy, because as you mentioned, Omar, the AI economy is now the full economy. Stock prices, valuations, all these things are all interrelated due to that circularity. I expect the stock market to go down by at least 10% at some point in 2026, taken down by hitting this brick wall of lack of AI progress, lack of AI profitability.
So that's interesting, and I have some more to say about that. But you also have, Anthropic potentially going public. You have the circularity, which may bring down the entire economy, but also in some ways is propping the whole thing up in a way that probably, at least for those that are going to win, might be enduring, right? Like the banks in 2008, 2009, right? Do you really think? Because what I look at is the rapid adoption of this technology, right? And how many gajillions of users they have. Now, yes, there are a lot of questions about the business models, but the old Silicon Valley way of doing things was get a shit ton of users, figure out how to monetize later, right? What happens if OpenAI suddenly charges everybody to get back, to get your chat history, to
Right.
to open up a new mode, and much more money probably to be made on the enterprise side,
Yeah.
right? And these companies are not huge yet. Like they haven't built entire sales forces that are vertical specific. I think I'm more bullish on the business model potential. Now, I agree. The compute investment alone is massive. It's really, really a costly business, but it's not like these are mass. If you think about the top 2 AI specific companies, at least, they're not huge companies. Like I don't even know if they have 1,000 people yet. Maybe they do, but they're operating fairly leanly. And I think the potential for monetization there is there. That hasn't been their goal, right?
Yeah. So I want to give a different analogy. I think a lot of people look at this and say, oh, it's .com 1.0 all over again. And I'm sure that there will be
From which
winners.
we had
Yeah.
some winners. We had
Right.
some
There will
real
be.
winners.
Right.
We
'Cause
had a
you could
lot
say,
of duds, but we had some winners too.
if you owned Amazon stock in 2000, you were crying into your stock ticker, if stock tickers existed in 2000, because all of a sudden your stock had gone down by like 95%. However, if you had held that Amazon stock till 2025, you would now be cheering into your virtual stock ticker because you would more than have made up that money and then a ton more on top of that. So there's definitely going to be winners, no doubt. And I totally agree with you that technology is here to stay. It's useful technology at its core. However, what I think is the big difference between Amazon circa 2000 and OpenAI circa 2025 is that it is costing OpenAI so much more for every person they serve. If Jeff Bezos wanted a random person in Seattle to log into Amazon.com and buy Pride and Prejudice, the marginal cost of that was zero. If you allow Joe Schmo, Jeremy Schieffelin, to come onto ChatGPT for free and run $50 of your server costs and pay you nothing for a day's worth of OpenAI usage, that just does not add up. It's not one of those things where you can make it up on the volume because it only gets worse. So I think the true analogy, and I know a lot of people have talked about this, is more like the industrial age. And you could pick your poison. You could say it's more like the railroads, more like building out factories. But because there's such a massive CapEx cost, none of the marginal cost advantages of the last 25 years of the internet apply here. And so you're sinking all this money in the hope that someday you run away with it. And unlike the massive beneficiaries of the dot-com boom, who had these huge network effects, like you were locked into Facebook, you were locked into Google, you were locked into Amazon. No one's locked into OpenAI, no one's locked into Anthropic. They're all competing tooth and nail for the same exact users who have switching costs of zero, which means that just like those railroad barons, you may feel high and mighty now, but when that bill comes due, watch out.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is some loyalty. Some of these models are better than other models at certain things, and people will develop some preferences over time. You can't just copy paste your entire chat history into another model. I guess you could try, but I have probably more faith than you that some of those economies of scale will hit, that they'll figure out I don't know if you have to indefinitely keep building huge server farms, right? But at some point you figure out a way to do that cheaper. At some point you get economies of scale. At some point, maybe you have partnerships where everybody's sort of sharing the costs and you're going in on these things together, including from the government. And again, I think there's a lot more opportunity to monetize. Now, will it fully cover the marginal cost? Like, that is the question for any business, right? You can't be losing money on every customer that you gain. But I see the way it's entrenched in our daily lives and our work processes. Like, I want to start a podcast that's my AI coworker, just talking about how people are using AI in their jobs. And I think so long as we presuppose that it's going to get better and more useful, right? That is the fundamental thing you're saying is like, business model, questionable. But if it really is providing enduring value, then yeah, the business model will be figured out because inelastic demand, people will pay for things that they need, right? I think you're more skeptical than I am that like people truly need this and will thus pay for it. Clearly, they need to be charging users and enterprises more than they are. I just think that's their plan. We're not there yet. And the big question will be, is it going to be sticky enough to do that?
Let me give the silver lining to my prediction, because I think people are going to say, Jeremy, I thought you were the AI guy. You're all doom and gloom all of a sudden.
Yeah, Mr. Silicon Valley, come on.
You got, takes one to know one, I guess. Here's the silver lining for all the job seekers and career coaches out there, is that if AI was to really justify its trillion-dollar valuations, what that would imply is that it is creating $1 trillion of new revenue or cost savings for its client companies. And we don't see a lot of companies saying, hey, AI is super useful for helping us do all this new stuff we weren't doing before. Most companies are using it for efficiency. And efficiency is Latin for layoffs. As in, we no longer need this giant advertising team at Coke because our Coke Magic AI can now do all of their jobs. And so I think the really good news, and this is why people are actually going to be slightly happy, even if their stocks go down, is that the failure of AI, at least in the short term, is going to be the sustenance of our human occupations, because AI is not taking all of our jobs, at least not this year. So that's my final prediction.
I think there's a lot of day-to-day operational processes that don't involve just laying off people that are really changing the way people work. I don't think it's quite as simple as that picture. My skepticism on AI, agree with you on the business model questions to some extent. I do think they'll make progress in figuring that out. But I wonder about it more from the other side, the consumer side. Are we just gonna, or have we already, but will 2026 be the year where clearly we just go a little too far and we want to dial it back, kind of like we did with smartphones, kind of like we did with social media, right? We're all realizing that now. And so I kind of wonder, like, are we just going to raise up our hands and say, like, hey, maybe we should actually pause a little bit here from a user perspective? Not because I think it's going to be regulated. There's this great fear of not winning versus China and all of that. Business models, TBD, energy usage, requirements for computer, insane. But there's also all this slop coming out. The sycophancy is just silly. Like, I kind of feel like there's something bubbling up that people are going to like swing back to preferring humans, human created content, and also humans, hiring humans for jobs, right? So even though AI is probably better than humans at a narrow set of tasks, I just think that humans in the value chain are what we're built for, and that we might, from a consumer perspective, really start to swing back to that, like live concerts, man. And like even having that little watermark, a disclaimer that something's AI generated, rather than being a like, oh, I should trust that because it's smarter than me, smarter than the experts even. We might actually start to asterisk that and say, I don't know if I value that the same way I do as something human generated and all of its beautiful imperfection.
Wow,
So
so
that's that.
Omar is predicting humanity's Renaissance 2.0, driven by our anxiety about these new machines.
I think there's fair questions on both sides of AI in terms of the business, the technology itself, and on our consumption of it, is all I'm saying. Maybe we will go back to remembering, the importance of humans as our coworker, as creators of content, as adding something really unique and valuable into the work we do.
I love that.
Um, yeah, I got to ask about your prediction for something related. What do you
Yeah.
think is going to happen in the job market in 26?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I do think that for all the reasons we talked about in terms of 2025's economic vibe session, that's going to bleed over into 2026. Unless
Yep.
there's some magic stimulus that gets employers hiring again, unclogs those gears of progress that we were talking about, I see more of the same. And obviously, if there's a downturn in the tech economy, that's going to affect the rest of the economy. That being said, I just don't think it's going to be at that same uber bearish level of, whoa, AI is replacing all of us in 2026. Now we're at 20 or 40% white collar unemployment, like the CEO of Anthropic is saying. I don't see that happening this year or anytime soon. What about
Yeah,
you, Omar?
I just see a pause. I just see a continued pause, right? Like, let's let the dust settle a bit. Let's really figure out what we need. But at least in tech, continue to drive efficiencies where possible. I think people are trying to figure out. We talked in an earlier episode about MIT's data around 95% of enterprise-wide AI pilots failing, right? Not having ROI. And that number is clearly going to continue to go down. So as companies figure this out, doesn't bode well for the job market, but we're not going to see a massive swing. Couple other predictions I have: a prediction about prediction markets, which somehow seems
Ah,
suddenly legal. Kalshi and Poly market. These things are going to take off. And go back and listen to our episode about sports culture in America, in particular sports gambling. It's insane how that has taken over an entire generation of especially young men. I don't see any difference with the prediction markets now where you can literally bet on everything. And I see a lot of people wasting a lot of time and money on
wow. Yeah. I think that's kind of one of these depressing disevolutionary moments where we realize our very primitive caveman brains that love to thrive on excitement and all the stuff that gave us access to fire and tools and all that are now being harnessed by these algorithms that take advantage of those instincts. So sad to say, I totally agree with you.
do you want to be whipped around by algorithms, or do you want to have agency and autonomy in your life? Resist that temptation, men. And then my
Yes.
last prediction is around politics, or maybe it's culture. I don't know, but we got midterms in 2026. And I think the Democrats are going to find their message, which is affordability. It's all about affordability. I don't know. I don't know if they will find their messenger, but that message seems to be resonating. And if they can just stick to it, we might see a big political change in 26. Thoughts on that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think the big question for me is not even just America, but the entire world. The entire world is clearly really upset right now because in 2024, every single incumbent in like 93 different countries in the world lost their race to stay in power. And that tells you that people are just not accepting the status quo, whether it's AI, whether it's the economy, whether it's vibes, whatever. And so I'm just hungry for some really strong, active leadership anywhere. I love to see it in the US, but anywhere in the world, if you can send us an example of someone who's actually getting the job done really well. Would love to hear about it because that would give us some hope for the future.
All right. Well, that's a great place to wrap.
And actually, hold on. I teed this up earlier intentionally because, as all the soccer nerds out there know, 2026 is a very special year as the World Cup returns to America for the second time. Omar was a young'un the last time it was here back in 94. But Omar, as the Cup returns to our shores, any big predictions for the Cup or its host country?
First prediction is because of Gianni Infantino, the head of FIFA's close relationship with Trump, they will figure out a way to allow people from all countries, even those that have now been banned to travel to the US, to get to the US to cheer for their teams. So they'll figure that out. That is a non-trivial issue when you're hosting a 48 country, the largest field ever, World Cup. So that's one. They've done something interesting with this draw where they have the top 4 teams on opposite sides of the bracket so that they could actually potentially play each other in the semifinals and finals. So you have to favorite the top countries. The France.
No more groups of death.
Yeah, no real groups of death anymore. And the favorites will get far. I mean, I like France. I've got tickets to see both France and Brazil. And I sure hope Italy qualifies because they're such a great soccer nation and they've had a terrible run in the last few cycles. But I don't have any sleeper picks. I think the World Cup format favors the strongest countries who've been through the meat grinder in their own regions. And that typically is Europe, sometimes South America. But you've just got a deeper group in Europe and they're all playing professionally in the top leagues. The big question is what's going to happen to the US, which is my all-time favorite team. We're hosting the tournament and it's really hard to extrapolate out a trend line from the inconsistent performances over the past year with Mauricio Pochettino at the helm. But the recent results have been promising. We've got some injury issues. A big part of the World Cup often comes down to just like the playoffs in any sport. Who's healthy at the right time? Do you have key players out? But I'm bullish. I think the US will get out of their group. I think we may even get a round or two past that in terms of the knockout rounds. But we are still a long ways away from, the US men's national team making a World Cup final, probably even in our lifetime.
Wow.
But I'm hopeful that this could be the year and the coach that gets us further than we've ever been.
And I'm sure that's something we can bet on Kalshi. So on
Yes.
that note, I want to wish everyone out there an amazing start to the holiday season, incredible adventures to start off the new year. And please come back and join me and Omar for a fresh round of insights on WTF Is Up in 2026 and beyond.
And remember, in 2026, be a part of the solution, not the problem. Don't just stare passively at the things that you care about. Be a part of that solution. Don't forget to keep humans in the loop and be good to each other.